This is actually my first time to be at University of Amsterdam. I've been to Amsterdam, but never the university. This is first time, and I'm grateful. I'm honored with the opportunity, and thank you for making it happen. Bu Vera, Pak Sandi, for connecting us with our colleague here at the university. The issue reinventing democracy, and I'm trying to put my academic hat here because I was participating in the democratic process a few months ago, well, almost a year by now, and we have been facing with a few challenges. But let me share some of my thought about democracy, youth, power, and integrity. And this is a reflection. As reflections that allow me to go through some of my thought on those subjects. Let me start with the tensions that in Indonesia today we have a whole generations that has lived only under democracy, the youth. They grew up with elections, they grew up with social media debates, protests, and freedom of speech as something that is normal because they grew up with it. At the same time, you know, this is why it's a tension. On the one hand, you have this generation. On the other hand, the quality of our democracy has been quietly eroding for almost a decade. Things like independence of institutions, anti-corruption works, civic space. Scholars call it as democratic backsliding. So you see this tension today. And the surprising part of this is that Indonesia's Gen Zs says that they are satisfied with our democracy. This is our youth, we're saying. Even when the system is weakened, and researchers, it's just published a month ago, describe them as complacent Democrats. They say democracy is good, but they feel little urgency to defend it. And in the survey done last year, 2024, we have large portions of the youth, according to that survey, would choose strongman image, even if it's linked to possible authoritarian, without having reservation. So what I want to ask and would like to invite you to think together is a serious questions. What keeps democracy alive when a new generations feel democracy is permanent? Democracy can be taken for granted, even when the quality of our democracy were eroding. So allow me on these reflections to share my argument. There are three parts to this argument. One, the youth in Indonesia hold historic moral power, and it still does, since the old days. Today is the 27th, and 28th of October we are celebrating, commemorating the Sumpah Pemuda, the youth oath. Again, so the youth has hold historic moral power. But the second argument is that moral power alone is never enough. We also need integrity in how power is exercised, how power is being used. And the third argument that I'd like to share on this reflection is reinventing democracy means combining: 1, integrity; 2, participations; 3, shared prosperity across generations not just by telling young people, please fix what we broke. We means the previous generations, the older generations. So those are three arguments that I'd like to share with you on these reflections. Now let me start with youth and power in Indonesia. And I would call it as a journey from moral force to governing force. In Indonesia, we grew up with the story of pemuda, young people, as the conscience of our nations. Let's remember a few milestones. 1928, it's the youth that get together and able to form an idea of one nation and able to agree upon one common language. Without that, all this diversity that we have will not be integrated into the feeling of oneness being Indonesia. And it gave us a milestone and a foundations how we strengthen the togetherness given the diversity that we have. And it was a genius breakthrough in 1928. And then in 98, which is about 70 years later, it's the student and the civil society activists, which is mostly young people as well, push to end an authoritarian regime in Indonesia. And they open up a democratic era in 98. 70 years later. Now in 2019, 2020, we have seen student activists, labor groups, environmental groups again filled our street to protest legal changes that was happening that weaken our democratic institutions, that weaken anti-corruption effort, and protections toward laborers. Those are the period of 2019, 2020. Again, who are out in the street, who are out there speaking up about change? It's the youth. So in our national narratives, I would say youth is not just about young people that own the future. Youth is an emergency brake in our country. Youth is an emergency brake. Whenever we are facing a crisis, it's the youth that step in and play a significant roles. But here is the uncomfortable fact of today, if I may say. The data has shown that the Gen Z Indonesians today, those are born after 1997, this is called Gen Z, it is reported that they have higher satisfactions with our democracy than the older generations. Many watchdogs say that our democracy is getting weaker, but for them, democracy is doing fine. And for the young people, according to the study, have also shown that the Gen Z tend to normalize strong, decisive leader style, support for strong leader who can bypass the usual political process to get things done. Especially, this is correlated with Gen Z's vote for winning the tickets in 2024. Many of these generations do not see past human rights abuses as disqualifying. For them, order and efficiency can look much more attractive than procedural checks or balances. So this is the reality, but let's not panic looking at that reality. This doesn't mean that the young Indonesians are anti-democracy. In fact, survey shows that they still say democracy is the best form of government. What this simply means is democracy feels normal to them, just like oxygen. Something that we live with, but we didn't realize that it may go away. So we take it for granted. Let's worry about it. And around the world, I think we are seeing the similar mood, that young voters want dignity, fairness, climate security, and they're not romantic about institutions. They're not romantic about conceptual idea of democracy, but they're more practical. So I think today our challenge is not to lecture the young people, but it is to connect with their demands. What are the demands of the young people? Economic fairness, climate justice, equality before the law, and with the hard and sometimes boring work of keeping democracy clean and accountable. So I call this as a moral imaginations, linking hope to responsibility. So that's one part of my reflection here. The second is about the integrity. I'll put it that power is not only legitimate when it is, power is only legitimate when it is accountable. So integrity is key, and integrity is something that often absent. And integrity in democracy means power is exercised in a way that people can trust, people can verify, people can correct. So when I speak about integrity, I don't mean to be a nice leader, but I mean build system that make abuse of authority much harder and fairness is much easier. And we are facing tremendous challenge here in Indonesia. We know that the price of corruption is so high. It has distorted who gets contract, who gets protections, who gets justice. And I've said it many, many times throughout the years on our observations about this issue, that corruption has become so embedded that even entering politics can require compromise with corrupt actors. But we cannot accept that as normal. We have to break the supply of corruption early. I think in university, in the education sectors, we need to do that. When I serve as university leadership, one of the breakthrough that we undertake was making anti-corruption courses as mandatory, because it is something needed to sort of reduce or cut the supply of potential corruptors in the future. So it is very important to bring back integrity into our politics here in Indonesia. And having integrity is a prevention, it's not a punishment, and we need to get it back. So we need also to start, in my reflections, viewing government from a different perspective, from ruler of the people into partner of the people. That government form collaboration with the people. And the state should not act like they own all the truth, but the state should invite, should engage, and make citizens, general publics, as co-creator to many, many problems that government is facing. If I may share a little bit of our experience in Jakarta, we approach challenges in our city along with the citizen of Jakarta, and then we create collaboration. That everything that we're doing, we are doing it together with the civil society, with the resident directly, with expert, so forming a collaboration in solving many challenges in our city. So, what you said earlier, this requires transparency. To engage the public in the process, it requires meritocracy, and often we use the term for simpler word, good governance. And government that does this approach will send a clear message that it has integrity. When meritocracy is there, when transparency is there, good governance is there. Why this matters? Why collaborations, transparency, meritocracy matters for the youth? Why that is the case? Because the young people will not defend a system that they consider as hypocrites. They will not defend it. If meritocracy is absent, if integrity is absent, if collaboration is absent, then what's in it that we have to defend it? Why should we care? So, if they see law being used to protect the powerful, the youth will quietly disengage. And the silence they create will give rooms for authoritarian styles to grow and to take over. And this is why it matters to reform that aspect. Now, let me talk about complacent Democrats that refers to this Gen Z. The Gen Z says that democracy is good, but we don't feel the urgency about threat to democracy. What has happened in the past 7 years, I would say, is not a threat in their perspective. This complacency makes backsliding a lot easier because you can easily weaken institutions of democracy quietly, while most citizens, including the young people, were still feeling, I'm satisfied with democracy. So, the deteriorations of the quality of our democracy can happen silently. So that's the dangers. But what's the hope? The hope is that the same generations who care less about institutions, they care more about fairness. They talk about wages, they talk about housing, they talk about climates, access to health, dignity at work. So at the same time, they talk about these issues. When the Indonesian youth marched in 2019 against the weakening of anti-corruption bodies, and they stand up against laws that is seen as unjust to laborers or workers and to environment, the youth have shown to us that they can still act as a moral alarm for the whole country. And this is not only in Indonesia. I think this is a phenomenon also in Asia. We have seen similar things happening across Asia, like the reform-minded youth parties in Thailand that won the popular vote on anti-corruption, on pro-reform agenda, and then met resistance from the military junta there. Pita just visited Jakarta about 3 weeks ago, and we had a long conversation. We share similar issue here. And globally, we have seen young climate activists, labor organizers, digital rights groups are forming cross-border alliances. They talk to each other, not just on the local governments, but on global phenomenon where democracy eroding and soft authoritarianism are emerging. So we are also seeing two things happening. On the one hand, they care less about the institutions of democracy that is eroding, but on the other hand, the youth were caring about practical issues that matter to the populations. Now, the warning is to us meaning the older generation, not your generation perhaps, because some of you are Z generations, but for the older generations, it is tempting for my generation, all the older generations, to say, looking at this threat to democracy, relax. The youth will step out and fix it. Okay? I think we need not to approach this with that kind of perspective. It is unfair to the youth, and it is irresponsible. So the current problems that we are now facing in our country, Indonesia, money politics, expensive elections. You tell me, I've gone through this process. Very expensive. Selective law enforcement. Just my friend just passed through this process. Very selective law enforcement. He was selected in that. These are all produced not by the youth. All these problems were produced by the older elites, including my generations. So we cannot outsource the work of repair to the youth. We cannot outsource this. So when we talk about the youth will save democracy, it has to end with a comma, not with a period. Yes, the youth will save democracy, comma. But the older leaders need to stop breaking democracy. Because it takes two to tango. It's not only this, it's the elderly, it's the elder generations that actually break democracy. So now let's look at the futures. Let's reinvent democracy from ritual into delivery. This is not slogans. What I'm going to say is not slogans. What I'm going to say is work plans. One, we need democracy to guarantee equal dignity, not just equal in the voting day. Not only equal rights on the voting days. Yes, Indonesia has become one country in one nation in 1928. We have become one republic in 1945. We have become one homeland in 1957, and then recognized by the world by a UN clause in 1982, that our ocean, our sea, and our land are one homeland. That's oneness in three stages. We need the fourth stage, which is one prosperity. So one nation, done. One republic, done. One homeland, done. What's missing today is one shared prosperity. Satu kemakmuran. So a just democracy, a quality democracy, must make people feel at least three things in their daily life. Safe to speak and to participate. 2, equal economic opportunity. 3, equal under the law. At least these three things must happen. So if ordinary citizens cannot feel those three things at the minimum, democracy is only a theater. Democracy becomes a kabuki, a performance. Second agenda, the democracy must be collaborative, not ceremonial. Public participation cannot just mean we have held consultations. We took photo, we took selfie, and then thank you everyone for coming for the consultations. We have to institutionalize partnership into co-creationship. That those in government are collaborators, and those as citizens, residents, as co-creator. So citizens help to design policy, monitor budgets, evaluate delivery, and this is beyond the traditional role that is often echoed. We in government will do everything. What you need to do, just two things: pay tax and vote in the election. You don't have to do the rest. No. We need you to pay more, to play a role more than that. And not only to criticize. This is beyond criticize, but co-creations. So this requires changing mindset of the state from egocentric to problem-centric. From chasing growth number into focusing on fairness and sustainability. I must add to this. We don't want to claim, but we tried to do this in Jakarta with collaboration. It is long process, sometimes painful. However, once we reach a collective agreement, it's like paving the solid foundations for building trust, and trust is key in democratic process. So that's the second agenda. The third, democracy must treat climate justice as part of social justice. Climate shocks today hitting fishing communities, farmers, coastal families, and floods in the northern coastal of Java, land subsidence, the changing fish pattern in eastern Indonesia. People already paying the price. And if the state says that we are democratic, but at the same time, we let these communities drown, that is not democracy. That is abandonment. And many of our communities, various different areas, we're saying we are abandoned, we have been forgotten. So climate responsibility is not a side project, and it is now a test to whether the state treats all citizens as equal or not. The fourth agenda is democracy must rebuild integrity every day. What do I mean by this? That integrity must not be outsourced to anti-corruption agencies such as KPK, while the rest of the system quietly normalize the transactional politics. Integrity must be cultural, must be taught early, must be practiced in hiring, in budgeting, in licensing, in planning at the city level, at the provincial level, or at the national level, everywhere. So a government that runs on merit, not on favoritisms, send a very visible signal to the populations that the house is trustworthy. And when citizens sees that, they defend democracy emotionally, not only intellectually. And if I may reflect on this, why integrity matters. When the Republic was founded, the founding fathers were coming from mostly privileged families that has the privilege to be educated with Western modern education. Most of them were educated in this very land. These are privileged individuals. They came back, fight to form a republic that is not only for the privileged, but a republic that provide equal opportunity for everyone. And these individuals, if I may say names, like Hatta, like Sahrir, Iwakusuma Sumantri, all of them were educated in the West, going back. In terms of number, they're very small. Highly educated in a country where 95% of the populations were illiterate. What makes the entire population follow their idea? These are the combinations. Intellectual power combined with integrity translate into power that is unstoppable. They have the trust of the public. Why they have the trust? Because integrity is there. Integrity is there. None of us were seeing Hatta, Sahrir, as individual pursuing micro self-interest. Yes, we all have self-interest. You know, only Gandhi perhaps doesn't have self-interest, or prophets. We all have a self-interest, but they were able to control that, and then with the integrity, they gain our trust. I've often shared this phenomenon with our colleague in the past few years, that names that I mentioned earlier, if I may ask you, what are their profession? Hatta, Sahrir, Soekarno, Natsir. What are their profession? Profesinya apa? Politician, yes. And families across the nation telling their kids, look at them, be like them. Right? Be like Hatta, be like Sahrir. Now, are you looking at politicians today and say, be like them? You're looking on TV and saying, be careful, don't be like them. Right? Why? The absence is not on the intellectuality. The absence is on what? Integrity. That is why our democracy must rebuild integrity in everyday life. It's a must. So, those are the fourth agenda. Now, for the older generations, what are the older generation must do? Quite a few are here, but you're not responsible for the decaying of democracy. You're observing from outside. I think for the older generation in Indonesia, let's stop saying the youth are apathies. Let's stop saying the youth were apathics. Because at the same time, we're often blocking their access to leadership. The older generations need to open political space. We need to lower the cost of running for office. We need to protect academic freedom. We need to protect free press, protect the rights to protest without intimidations. And that is our job of the older generations. So we also need to lead with integrity, so that integrity is in the Department of Political Science, not in the Department of Anthropology or the Department of History, because it is a story of the past. We need to make integrity a story of today. Because, the young generations can smell hypocrisy much faster than any pollster can smell. They smell it much faster. And then what about the younger generations? For the younger generation, let's not underestimate your leverage. Indonesia now, majority is young, and your expectations of fairness in itself is a political power. And do ask tough questions, such as, who benefit from this policy? Who pays the real cost? Whose voice is missing out in the room? Do ask tough questions when it comes to policy assessment. And remember that leaders' persona must go beyond cute, friendly, strong, but it has to go beyond that. Ask these questions. Does this leader protect rule of law? Or is she or he is going to bend the law? Does these leaders widen participations? Or is he or she is going to narrow participations? So we have shared duty for the young people, for the youth, and for the older generations. So the agenda for change, the real change, is a collective job across sectors, across regions, and across generations. And it needs leadership that is capable, that has integrity, and able to work collaboratively. Not only leadership that is centralistic and everything done in a unilateral way. Now, our responsibility today is to complete what previous generation has said. I've said it to you earlier. One nation, we did it. One republic, we did it. One homeland, we did it. Those are done by the previous generations. Our homework today to the future is one shared prosperity that is just, that is equal, and sustainable. So with that, let me end my opening remarks by saying that, democracy is not just rules, but democracy is about trust. And we have seen that in a democracy, the pillar is trust. In an authoritarian system, the pillar is fear. When fear deteriorated, authoritarian regime collapse. When trust is deteriorated, then democracy is in danger. So democracy is trust. And democracy is not only about protests or expressing our view, expressing our feeling, expressing our thinking, but it is about protections. And democracy is not just about freedom to speak, but it is also about freedom to live in a dignified life. So with that, I also think it is important to stay optimistic. And if I may, telling myself and others, let's stop saying Indonesia is broken. I often said that narrative is something that is not acceptable. The country is rising, actually, with all its problems. Ordinary people in Indonesia waking up before dawn. They work with integrity. They carry this republic with everyday hard work life. But the job is that those who are in the leadership need to match the integrity and the work hard of the regular people in our society. And I've quoted a couple of times, but I'll quote it here again, that Nelson Mandela once said, "It always seems impossible until it's done." That's not a poetry, that's actually an instruction. So let me end this by saying that yes, the young people were not the last defense of democracy, but the people with power are the last defense. The young people are often serve as the last alarm, and when they ring that alarm, leaders must listen, and leaders must correct the course with integrity, not with panic. So, if we are able to reinvent our democracy, not by replacing one generation with another, but by forcing power to serve the public with honesty, with fairness, and with courage, I think we can have our democracy work for achieving one shared prosperity for all Indonesia. Thank you.